There was a ruler of a town synagogue named Jairus. Every Sabbath the people of that town came to worship God at that synagogue, and Jairus was the man in charge. And he had a daughter whose birth had been celebrated by the whole town 12 years ago. The locals had watched her grow up, and she was much loved by everyone. And around the time of her birth, another family had a daughter approaching puberty. Her parents began to look for a suitable husband for her when tragedy struck. Her monthly bleeding started but never stopped. She had a hemorrhage. Doctors couldn't help her. She got worse, got skinny. Everyone knew her problem, and so she stayed at home. No one went near her because touching her or even her clothes made them unclean. And he watched her come to the priest at the synagogue, and they couldn't help her either. They just gave her a label, unclean, and she became very poor and full of shame. Well, Jairus felt sorry for her, and he was glad that her own daughter was growing up healthy and blessed. They were a wealthy family and had good standing in their community. But when his dear daughter was 12 years old, she also became sick. Doctors couldn't help her either, and she got worse. Her father considered getting help from a young man called Jesus, who was becoming very popular as a healer. When he touched sick people or spoke to their sickness, they always recovered. Jairus' company of synagogue rulers were reserved about this underclass chap. They alone enjoyed the status of being in authority in their communities. Yet this Jesus never consulted with them to do his work. In fact, the day he went public, he had read from some scriptures in his hometown synagogue, and then he announced that he himself was the fulfillment of those scriptures. That was a claim to be the long-promised Messiah of Israel, a serious claim. They took him out of town to stone him, but his manna was so strong, he walked right through that crowd, and he has been out of favour with synagogue rulers ever since. And to make matters worse, synagogue attendance was down. He's been stealing congregations. Jairus weighed up his options. His first duty was to family. His dear daughter was dying. He's got to do something, so he decides to go and find this Jesus. A word on the street is that he's down by Lake Galilee. It's tough leaving his girl, but a man must do something. He calls servants and they leave. It's a long walk. Eventually they reach the shores of Lake Galilee, and a large crowd is around Jesus, and they part to let him through. Jairus is desperate. He sees Jesus, he falls at his feet, and he begs him earnestly, "My daughter is dying. Please come and put your hand on her so that she will be healed and live." And to his great relief, Jesus stops what he's doing and he comes with him. Jairus thinks to himself, it helps being a man of high social standing to get the help that you need. And he makes it clear that they must hurry to get home before she gets worse. They head for home. Jesus follows. But the crowd that had parted to let them through closes in again, pressing around Jesus. Jairus is anxious. Hurry up. Those around him catch the urgency, but it doesn't filter back to Jesus. It's calm, unhurried, just strolling along. Jairus is getting desperate with no means of controlling Jesus. Then he looks back and Jesus has stopped walking and he's looking down. Everyone is pressing round and he asks them, "Who touched my clothes?" Well, even his own disciples don't understand. You see the people crowding against you and yet you can ask, "Who touched me?" But Jesus keeps looking around to see who's done it. Then a poor bent-over woman owns up. Jairus knows that girl. Her parents brought her to the priests at his synagogue at the time that their own daughter was born. We were celebrating, but they were mourning. He was blessed with a healthy daughter, and they were cursed with a label, unclean. And things deteriorated as one doctor after another took her money but couldn't help her. Well, 12 years later, here we are again. He's the desperate parent now. Their daughter is alone. And we're both trying to get help from Jesus. The crowd parted for me, but not for her. She had pushed her way through, head down, No one wants to be touched by an unclean person. Touching only their clothes makes them unclean for the rest of the day. They'll need to take a bath to become clean again. Well, this woman touches many people as she worms her way through the crowd. She arrives at the hem of Jesus' cloak. If she touches his clothes, Jesus also will become unclean, and he doesn't have time for a bath because he's got to come and see my daughter. She reaches out and touches the hem of his cloak. Jairus' body standing up, but his mind is racing ahead and anxiety is rising. If he moves on now, there might just still be time. Then he has another anxious thought. If this Jesus can heal my daughter, then he must be Messiah. And then he would have to believe in him, and that would put him out of favour with other synagogue rulers. But he can't be bothered for that right now. Some of the more politically minded in the crowd are thinking that if Jesus could help Jairus, then the whole synagogue community might accept him. This move could be strategic. They join him to hurry Jesus along. But Jesus is still stopped. The woman's talking to him and telling him the whole truth. Jesus, it all began 12 years ago, and this is what happened, and this is how they treated me, and I heard about you, and I believed you could help me if only I touched. And it seemed to go on and on and on. And Jesus is listening to every word. Big smile, completely relaxed, giving her total attention. And then comes Jesus' healing words. Daughter, he said, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Daughter? Jesus doesn't have any daughters. He's pronouncing her a child of God. Go in peace, he says. He is giving her peace with God. Her faith in Jesus removed all sin that had stood between her and God. Jesus cancels the curse his priest had put on her. Be freed from your suffering, he had said. There he goes, speaking to sickness again. The woman feels in her body that she is healed. Now nothing can stop her from being fully restored into the community. She's a daughter again with a loving heavenly Father through Jesus. Who am I, Jairus, to stop him talking to his daughter because of my daughter? Meanwhile, an envoy arrives from the house of Jairus with some bad news. Your daughter is dead. My dear little girl, no, his faith is dashed. His last hope was Jesus, and he's let me to wait for this woman. And he looks back. This radiant, adoring, transformed young lady now leading worship of Jesus as he smiles back at her. And then this envoy says to Jairus, why bother the teacher anymore? What little faith he had is smashed to the ground. He goes into shock, into denial. And then to his surprise, Jesus turns back to him. Don't be afraid, just believe, he says. Jairus takes courage from these words. But otherwise all is lost. Not that he believes Jesus can now help him, but he's witnessed him restore this now stunning young lady. She'd been held under a curse all the years that his girl was growing up. He turns his attention back onto Jesus, not helped at all by the fickle crowd. Jesus reads the situation, and he stands between Jairus and the crowd, and he forbids them all from following any more, all except 3 of his disciples, Peter and the 2 brothers James and John. The 5 of them walk on together, and in this company Jairus senses a little bit of hope rising, only to be dashed when they come near his house. There's a lot of noise. Mourners have been hired quickly because bodies decompose quickly in that hot climate. Professional mourners, women with hair tangled, clothes torn, faces dirty, dirge of pipes, shrill screams, loud wailing, distorted limbs, bodies swaying to the clatter of tambourines. More tragic because he was only 12. Woe to her, woe to her mother, woe to her father. Hope is crushed. Well, Jesus, his 3 friends and Jairus enter his house to find his wife wailing uncontrollable sobs of despair. There's no comfort to offer her. He's in shock too. And Jesus is completely calm. He raises his hand to speak. Why make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but asleep. He said this for those inside who still had a spark of faith. His words are gossiped back through the crowd. Mourning turns to mockery and laughter at Jesus' expense. But he doesn't care about the opinions of faithless people. But the mockers turn up the volume, and more pressure is put on those whose faith is small as a mustard seed. Their tiny faith gets tested in the fire of public opinion to see if it's genuine. Then Jesus stands up to the mocking crowd with the full weight of his mighty mana, his authority, and he puts them all out of the house, all except Jairus, his wife, and Jesus' 3 men. They enter the bedroom where his daughter's body lies on her bed, still, cold, and stiff. Jairus knows very well that if touching a bleeding woman makes a person unclean, then touching a dead body makes you filthy. But instead of making Jesus unclean, touching Jesus had made her clean. Well, Jesus goes straight for her little hand and he holds it. And then he speaks to her in his own local dialect, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. We're thinking dead bodies don't hear. Oh, he's not talking to her hearing. He's talking to her spirit. Immediately, at Jesus' command, the little girl's spirit re-enters her body and brings every cell, every tissue, every organ back to normal bodily life. She sits up perfectly well. She gets up and she begins to walk out of her room. The mouths of those mockers and mourners drop open, completely amazed. Right before their eyes, walking round as a happy 12-year-old girl, the one they'd come to mourn over. And Jesus gives them strict orders not to tell anyone. How can he realistically think this can be kept a secret when a larger-than-ever crowd is gaping outside? Nobody knows. Then he tells her parents to give her something to eat because she's alive and well and hungry. We should get on with our lives. But realistically, life will never be the same again after that day when Jesus came into the house of Jairus.